And we went into this Airbnb effectively and had this room, and we looked out over the window, and it was the most stunning and frankly romantic place to be. And no big surprise, in the course of that evening, somewhere along the line it turned romantic and we started kissing, and that went to fellatio, which went to Hi, this is Mike Balaban. Welcome to another episode of BAMMER Tales. Today I'd like to share with you the story of an affair I had with my house cleaner from 1985 and how it unfolded unexpectedly while we were both on vacation in Italy. In the mid to late 70s, I moved to New York, and for the next 15 or 20 years worked in Wall Street and had to be extremely closeted because at that time it was impossible to be openly gay and not risk losing your job or getting paid less than you deserved. So I kept everything under wraps. Everybody at work thought I was straight. Everything was going along until 1981 when suddenly AIDS was discovered and announced to the world, and a pall was cast over the gay community. It took a few years for the seriousness of that epidemic to become clear. In the beginning, we were all a little careful and wondering if it was going to affect us, but it wasn't clear just how dramatically it would. We kind of slowed down the pace of our sexual activity. We immediately embraced, for the first time, the use of condoms. Until then, gay men had never needed or perceived that there was any need for this encumbrance between us and our partner. But in order to remain safe and healthy, we started using them all the time. In 1983, I decided in my Wall Street job that was so demanding that I really didn't have time to clean my own apartment, but obviously it needed to be cleaned regularly. So I began looking around for a house cleaner, somebody who would come by once every week or two, would clean the bathtub and the toilet and the dishes and change my bed linen and do my laundry, etc. And at that time, it was not very costly. It was about $50 per visit to have someone do that. Today, that'd probably be around $150 or so. But because I was working on Wall Street and making a decent salary for a 30 or so year old guy, I had the money and it was worth spending it for the extra time. Now the question became, how do I find someone to do that job? So I asked my former boyfriend, my ex, do you know of anybody? And he said, coincidentally, I have a young guy cleaning my apartment. He's rather new in New York and he's looking to build up his business so he can afford to stay here. I'll introduce him to you and refer you to him and see if it works. And so he referred Stuart to me, who was maybe a 23-year-old or so recent graduate of a university in Louisiana. He was a strapping 6'2", handsome, young, kind of preppy Southern young man. And he came over, we met, and he agreed to work for me and clean my place. And so I gave him a set of my keys, allowing him to have access to my apartment when I was at work on the trading floor every day. I would leave for work at 7 in the morning and not get home until 6 or 7 in the evening. So it made sense to do that. And every week or two, I can't remember the frequency, Stuart would come by and clean my place, and it worked like clockwork for several years. And because our schedules were so different, we hardly ever saw each other. But every once in a while, I would have a day off from work on the day when he was cleaning, or I would have to leave late for work because I had a doctor's appointment or something, and we would overlap. And so we chatted and became friendly. And I could sense a frisson, as the French say, a sexual undercurrent of tension between us. Now, I was never very good with my gaydar, so even though I knew he was gay, I really didn't know if he was attracted to me, but I was attracted to him. And so, I kind of was playful with him and flirting, etc., but that was it. And then 1985 came along, by which time he was about 25 and I was 33. And we happened to overlap one day where I mentioned that I had decided to book my first trip, maybe ever, certainly in a long time, on my own to an exotic, distant location, in this case, Italy. I booked a trip to Rome by myself for late April, early May in 1985, and I told him about it. And I had studied in Italy 12 years earlier, so it was familiar to me. It wasn't going to be a strange new place, but I was still traveling alone. Well, coincidentally, Stuart said, "Oh my gosh, I also arranged a vacation to Italy. What are your dates and where are you going?" And we compared notes, and it turns out I arrived in Rome on day 1, and he arrived there on day 2. So we decided, oh, well, let's get together when we're in Italy and we can hang out some. So that was the plan, and that was it. But when I met up with him on day number 2, we decided, well, why don't we just travel together? We can split the costs. So we rented a car and we drove from Rome down to Sorrento, Salerno, Pompeii, the Amalfi Drive, and we ended up in a bed and breakfast on a cliff, hillside cliff, looking over the Mediterranean Sea in a town called Ravello, where the famous gay writer of the 1940s and 50s, Gore Vidal, was known to have a home. And we went into this Airbnb effectively and had this room, and we looked out over the window, and it was the most stunning and frankly romantic place to be. And no big surprise, in the course of that evening, somewhere along the line it turned romantic and we started kissing, and that went to fellatio, which went to anal sex. And because we had not planned on having sex, we didn't use condoms. We went all the way through the end, and then it was like, oh my God, what have we done? Because given the risk of catching AIDS from one encounter, by that time, 1985, I was just beginning to have friends get sick, get ill, go in the hospital, and eventually die. And in the latter half of the 80s, that was quite commonplace. And so for the next several months after that happened, Stuart and I both got tested regularly for HIV, and thank God we both ended up negative. But it was a scary moment. And that kind of cemented the rest of our trip. We traveled together up through central Italy to Florence and Siena and visited the statue of David. And it was so romantic. But I'll be honest, after 10 days together with someone you don't know that well, and you're together all the time, you start to know each other really well, and you begin to figure out how compatible you are. And as much as we were attracted to each other, there were differences in our personalities, which became clear and which set us off a little bit. So, for example, I like to stop every 5 minutes when we're driving and take photos because I wanted to chronicle this for the future. And Stuart was annoyed by that and kept saying, why do you feel like we have to stop? We just did it. Of course, now, 3 or 4 decades later, he's thrilled that I have these photos of our trip. But at the time, it felt like an annoyance. So those differences just became apparent. And by the end of the trip, we were kind of happy, I think, for it to end and us to go our separate ways in New York. But that then raised the question, would we continue with our employer-housekeeper arrangement? Didn't really seem to make sense given what we'd been through together. So we agreed mutually to terminate it. He remained a friend, so much so that a year later I got my first summer share in the Hamptons, and I invited Stuart out as a guest, and he ended up meeting my landlord out there, and they became a couple. And so I've been interlinked with Stuart since 1983 when we met. And in 2020, when I relocated from New York after 44 years to San Diego, guess where Stuart lived at the time? In San Diego. And we reconnected and became really close friends again. And then eventually he would meet or actually start dating someone he knew in New York, and they would decide to become partners. And Stuart left San Diego, moved back to New York, and I see he and his partner whenever I go back there, but otherwise it's not quite as frequent contact as it used to be. But still, here we are, 41 years or so after we met, and we're thick as thieves in terms of our friendship. And there is a big difference. Stuart was a tall, peppy, kind of all-American young man when I met him. Today, he's got a big bushy beard and he's a big muscle daddy. But he's still the same warm, lovable man that I met in the mid-'80s. That's my story of my affair in, Italy. And I wonder if you have any similar experiences to share or any thoughts for other story ideas you'd like me to cover. If you do, please let me know in the comments. Also, please subscribe if you haven't already to this page and tell your friends about it. Thank you for watching and listening to another episode of BAMMER Tales. This is Mike Balaban.